Cavalier faithful, welcome back on into the Cleveland Pulse YouTube channel. Today, we're going to talk Cavaliers offseason among other topics, but before we get started here, I have to introduce our special guest for this episode. Today, he's, like I said, our special guest. He's a coach. He's a co-host of the Mark Price for Three podcast and the host of the Aaron Unscripted podcast. Husband, father, Mr. Aaron Conrad, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, man, I'm honored to be here. Anything for Cleveland, anything related to Cleveland, I'm always in. So
awesome.
Except for the Browns. We'll talk about that. But
That's all right. That's all right. Well, all right, let's get that out of the way first. So
right.
So I was looking at your bio a little bit. So Cavs, Guardians.
Yeah.
Who? What your football team is who?
The Raiders.
The Raiders. Okay, fair enough. So someone in the AFC, but not like it's a direct rival. And then I saw you're a Tar Heel fan, which I think is, not totally uncommon. You got people who are fans of, the college sports, scene all around the place. But Guardians, Cavaliers, we'll let the Raiders slide for now. But as far as I'm concerned, the Cavaliers offseason, it's been a little polarizing. I kind of want to hear your perspective from someone who is not only a coach, who's not only, a podcast host, especially with a Cavalier legend like Mark Price, but just your kind of general thoughts of maybe the perception of the Cavaliers offseason. You could talk about last, season as a whole as well. I think it's all totally relevant. Just as far as someone who's in the space of basketball, in the space of hoops, how have you kind of seen this last 6+ months for the Cavs kind of develop?
I think the word would be interesting.
Okay.
I don't know how else to say it at this point. It's interesting. At this moment, we don't know, I think we all entered the offseason hoping that there would be some big moves and trades. And it's so interesting how social media has changed our perception of the offseason. Right. We see rumors. Sam Amico, a good friend of the Mark Price show and of mine, puts out great content, and is constantly on top of, who the free agents are, what trades are possibly happening. So I watch a lot of what Sam has to say on this stuff, but at this point, it looks like they're going to lock in, and their message, it sounds like, is, hey, we're going to get a new coach. We're going to lock in our guys. We're going to give them a lot of money for next year, and we're going to roll with who we have. We're going to dance with who brought us, so to speak. And it's interesting because I feel like last year was a little bit of a disappointment. And I will say, I'll say in advance, is working with Mark on the co-hosting his podcast. I'm a 90s basketball guy. And so I guess I'm old school. I don't know who your audience is in terms of, who would see this or listen to it, but
we got a little bit of everybody. You'll see people. I think actually our biggest audience base is like that 35 to 44, years old. But we have a lot of people who are a little bit younger and haven't, didn't really experience 90s basketball like myself. I was born in 99. So I got the very early end or the very early beginning of 2000s that I kind of remember. Obviously, I remember the 2007 finals. But past that, basketball has changed a lot since then. But there is a good portion of our audience that, probably doesn't remember or didn't watch any of 90s basketball.
And that's the thing. The game has evolved and changed, as you've said a few times. I think it's so hard when the old hats like me that sit around the barbershop talking about 90s basketball, the old days, the good old days, so to speak. And there were people in the 80s that would talk about it when I was growing up in the 90s that, I didn't understand it. I didn't relate to it because I didn't watch it. But now it's everywhere. You have all these things. But at the end of the day, the game has evolved and changed. And so I think many of us would love to see the old school game, but that the game has changed. So we just did on Mark's podcast, actually, that's going to be out this week. We just compared and contrasted the 92 team versus today's dream team. And, at the end of the day, it's very difficult to do that because today's game is literally, if you look at today's dream team, for example, it's a lot of 3 and 4 position, 2, 3, and 4 position.
Sure.
Not a lot of 1 through 5.
Right.
I don't even know if they have it's a numberless position now, basically.
They don't even list people as centers anymore, really.
Right. Embiid's shooting threes at this point. So, that's where we're at. But those of us that love the old game, so to speak, loved seeing David Robinson in the post and Barkley on the other side. of the other block, opposite block. That doesn't happen anymore. And so it's very, very difficult when you watch today's game to say what's what. I know the Cavs have gone to two centers, back to the old school. I think of the Knicks when they had the Twin Towers, and the Cavs had Doherty and Hot Rod back in those days. You always had your two bigs, so to speak. The Cavs have kind of bought into that system. And so back to the original question that you asked me is, where are they at? I don't know. We'll see. I think my guess is that Kenny Atkins said, give me 1 year, give me one chance, give me one shot with this team. I will say there's going to be a lot of pressure on that team. And the other thing that I really started all that out with is in the 90s, the late 80s and early 90s, guys played 82 games.
Right.
They weren't taking time off. And so we got to see this whole product. I need to see this whole product, and especially for what they're getting paid now. Just, me being an old school guy, I want to see that product out there on the floor. I don't want to see guys taking 20 games, 25 games off. I want to see those guys really get out there and do it. And here's the last thing I'll say on that. I think the Cavalanches that we've seen when it's most exciting to watch and they drop a 20-4 run on somebody, I want to see that the whole game. I don't want to just see guys get that 20-4 run and then, take a little bit of time off. Next thing you know, we got a close game at the end. So, yeah.
That's a really fair point at the end. Like, just competent, consistent basketball through 4 quarters of play is something that has escaped this team. And I think you can kind of look at the last, 3 playoff series that they've been a part of: Boston, Orlando, and then New York, a season ago. That was kind of the theme. Like, hey, when we have that 15-3 run, or we go on a 12-0 run, we look like the best team in the Eastern Conference. And then there's like 4 minutes where it's no scoring, or you score 2 points in the next, half quarter, whatever it may be. But interesting that, I think that's an interesting talking point, because you can't really compare eras in, I feel like, a lot of sports. Maybe baseball, you could get away with it, where baseball has maybe changed the least out of the 3 major sporting events. That might even be a hot take, depending on who you ask. But football's evolved, and basketball, I think, has taken, the biggest leap through the eras, whether it be team construction. You go from team basketball, but hopefully you have one superstar, one all-star. Then you go into your big 2 and your big 3 era, where it's basically super teams. A lot of that was originated and started by LeBron leaving the Cavs the first time around on his way to Miami. And then I think you're kind of evolved into this era where, with the new CBA and even with the past couple of championship teams, whether it be Boston, whether it be Denver, they have all world talent. No one's going to say, oh, it's just the scrappiest team's going to go out there and win if they don't have talent. I don't think anyone's saying that, but It's like that Boston team in the finals, anyone out there could have been their best player on that given night. A lot of people, Jason Tatum got a lot of flack because it's like, hey, you're supposed to be this premier guy. You're supposed to be the 1A option, and other people are scoring more than you. Other people are rebounding the basketball better. Sure, he's that overall talent that kind of holds the glue together, but it's interesting where the NBA is now and how far the NBA has come. So I just want to, let's elaborate on that a little bit. The current state of the league, are the Cavaliers, in a position to compete at the highest level based on the roster construction that I kind of just talked about? Like, do you think there's enough overall talent, guys 1 through 7 or 1 through 8, to get the job done in this upcoming season where we stand? And how does that really kind of compare to, the 90s of basketball or the early 2000s?
It's a great question. I think whenever you have a talent like a Donovan Mitchell, you have a chance, right? You need if you have a guy that can go get you a bucket whenever you need it, and we've seen that with Mitchell, he can do that. So, you always got a chance. Now, that doesn't equate over 82, and that's certainly in the grind of the playoffs. But I think Mitchell elevated his game even more in the playoffs. You saw him really, because I think they go through the motions quite a bit, and that's the difference between, to your question, the 90s versus today. Is the 90s, they were grinding it out every night. I don't think guys were taking days off. There wasn't load management.
Right.
They were grinding every single night, trying to get the top spot in the East, so to speak, trying to get home court advantage. They understood the importance of that. And I think the league has now responded with this in-season tournament stuff and just trying to keep guys engaged. Well, you didn't have that in the 90s, and they weren't making the money they're making. Well, today they're making that money now, and they're less engaged than ever before. I do think the Cavs have a chance. Do I think they're good enough? Honestly, no, I don't. I still hope that there's maybe going to be another move here or there.
Sure.
I was encouraged last year. I thought Strus would probably bring some Miami Heat culture to the team. I think at times he did. I like Strus a lot. I really do. The guy that I really, Ty Jerome, this is going to be just a complete random take, but I really like Ty Jerome a lot. He's a winner. He won in college. He's just a guy. You need guys like Derek White. Let's look at the team that just most recently won the championship.
Yes.
You need guys like Derek White and Drew Holiday that you don't hear a lot about, but they just make winning plays. I don't. That's what I'd love to see the most on this team is guys that just go out and make winning plays. I don't need 4 all-stars. We've seen the big 3 doesn't necessarily always work.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of been the model, when LeBron exited to Miami, that was the model. And then other teams were trying to do that, and they're building these super teams. They're not always the teams that win. The teams that win are they have 5 guys that are bought in. And maybe 2 or 3 of those guys are just guys that make winning plays. They're not the headliner. They're not the big 3. Those are sometimes the most important guys like Derek White and Drew Holiday. Those guys were huge for the Celtics this year. That's so unnoticed in what they did. And that's what you need, I think, for the Cavs is who are going to be the guys that are going to be the unnoticed guys. I think they've got a lot of talent. I think there's a lot of guys out there. I don't think they're done. We're not to the season yet. I have a feeling there could be some other pickups. I've never been a big Morris Twins guy. Those
Right.
guys, I have my opinions on those guys, but man, he brought some winning culture to the team. So that's, I think the other thing is they need an alpha. You got your Mitchell, who's your star. Who's going to be the leader of the team? I think that was the question all last year is who's the leader of the Cavalier team? Who's the guy that's, when LeBron came back, it was clear who the alpha, who the dog was and who's telling everybody what they're going to do, whether you like that or not. They won a championship. You got to have a guy that's going to lead the team. And I think they all like each other. I don't think that's a question. I think they're great guys. I think everybody loves them as a fan. I'm not sure who the leader of the team is. And so who's going to step up? I don't think Darius Garland. I don't think that Garland's the guy that can be that leader. I think it probably does fall on Mitchell, which is a lot to ask, but when you're paying him what you're paying him, maybe that's worth it. You know what I'm saying? I just kind of think that's where it's at. I think they got to have a leader. I think they have talent. There's no question. Mobley's got to step up. It's time for Mobley to step up, and especially because he got paid to do that. So
I just think I think everything you brought up there, were good points, and it just shows how awkward of a spot almost that this team is in because they're good enough to compete now. Altman has given out contracts that seem like he wants to be able to compete for the rest of this decade, let's just say.
Right.
Inherently, there's nothing. I think just if you look at a lot of actions and a lot of, just things surrounding this Cavs team on their own, they're not really an issue. But when you put together the big picture, you're kind of like, okay, a lot of this doesn't fit. Like, yes, you want to be able to compete for as long as possible with the guys you drafted. I totally understand that. But do the guys you have now give you enough firepower to win an NBA championship? I think a majority of the fan base would say no. Right. Yes, will there be more shoes to drop? There could be. But we've kind of already committed to the guys who, if you wanted to change things up, if you wanted to reshuffle the deck and move some chairs around, you've already committed for at least this next season to a lot of the guys on the roster that you could have done with that. Was there going to be a move for Darius Garland? Could have been. There could have been possibilities. We could have, taken some calls as far as making trades for him. I don't think they were ever going to consider trading Evan Mobley. But he's probably the guy that gives you the most return if you wanted to make some crazy move between him and Mitchell. And I think Mobley, you still could have got some more, assets back over a Donovan Mitchell trade. But Donovan resigns. Jared Allen doesn't get traded. He actually gets an extension, which kind of comes out of the blue. And the biggest point I think that you brought up there is the alpha dog, the grit, the who's going to be the toughness aspect of this team.
Mm-hmm.
I get it. You win a first-round playoff series last year. It takes you 7 games. All credit to Orlando. They were well coached. They were a good team last year. They were more physical than us in some sense. And the games they won, they beat us. They beat the brakes off us. It's not like it was, every game was close down to the wire through 7 games. And I know that that's kind of how playoff series go these days, where if you lose one game, it doesn't really matter if you lose by 40, if you lose by 4, unless it's, the pivotal game. But Marcus Morris comes in and he seems to be the grittiest guy that you have maybe outside of Mitchell in the playoffs. And he was sitting on his couch the first 60 games of the year whenever we signed him. That's a glaring red flag for me. And I get it. We all like these guys. I think that this is a likable team. Darius Garland, Jarrett Allen, Mitchell, even some of your role players like Sam Merrill's a cool story. Strus kind of had that fire in the regular season where he would get, teed up, but I don't know if that exactly translated in the postseason. I don't think that, George Niang, with all due respect, strikes the fear of God into people. But it's like, these guys are likable, but do they have all the different well-rounded factors in order to, be able to compete and win a championship? But let's talk about that. Let's talk about this team kind of compared to Mark Price's era and just some of the differences that, that you see as far as someone who talks to Mark on a regular basis compared to what you see now. And I think it's interesting because your discussion, the dream team of old versus this current team. I think if you took the old dream team and you just brought them from that era and had them play in this era, I think that for one game, if they had no idea what was going on, if you just went back in the teleporter, grabbed all those guys, brought them and put them on a court against the team that's playing the Olympics right now, I think the current Olympics team would destroy them. Because they wouldn't even know what's going on. They'd be like, this 7-footer's out here, taking a 3. Their defense would be their game plan would be all, discombobulated. I think that they would be totally shell shocked. They would have no idea how to defend some of these, different sets where you have, your center out on the wing looking to take a 3. But I'll say this is a but. If you took the old dream team and you gave them 6 months of practicing, coaching, scouting, and then they played the team of now, I think the old dream team would probably beat them, if that makes sense. Now it's the same way. If you took this 2024 team and put them back in the older era, they would probably struggle in that aggressive environment. But let's just talk about some of the differences here before we kind of, wrap up for today. Don't want to take too much of your time. I really appreciate you hopping on with us.
No, I can't agree with you more. I think Mark says it best. He says it often on the podcast. You play in the era you're in. He gets so many questions all the time. How many would you average in today's game?
Right.
Who was the GOAT? Jordan or LeBron? I mean, those are the questions that I'm not Mark Price. I just been around him long enough to know that those are the questions the very first time I ever interviewed him.
Right.
Those are the questions I ask. If you interviewed him, you'd probably ask him the same questions. He probably gets sick of those questions. And that's why he has such a great response, and that you play in the era you're in. And you're 100% correct. If I dropped the 92 team in today, and this is where the barbershop conversation comes in, is, the old hats like me will be like, well, I don't know. Cause Karl Malone's going to drag Halliburton down the post, and Halliburton ain't guarding Karl Malone.
Right.
Or, well, who's going to guard so-and-so and who's going to guard so-and-so. Our conversation today was, at the point, because the reality is, LeBron's running the point right now for Team USA. Mm-hmm. Well, Magic is 6'9". That's actually, I'd pay to watch Magic in his prime and LeBron in his prime
for sure,
one-on-one, because that's a fantastic matchup. Honestly, that's must-watch TV. For those of us that remember Magic playing, that'd be a great matchup. But it's not, because they played in different eras and it's different time. Back to your point, I don't disagree. I think if you drop to the 92 team in today's NBA, I'm just thinking in my head, who on that team's hitting the threes. Right. Like today's, I'll say this. Mark Price led the league twice in 3-point attempts at 6 a game. Mm-hmm. Put your head around that for a minute. 6 per game. Steph's getting 6 up in the first quarter.
It's crazy. You have role players doing 6 a game now.
So that really ends the conversation of eras, in that They're not the same. It's not the same. You had 1 through 5 versus now positionless basketball. They're completely different. So, but at the end of the day, Mark just said it on his podcast that we recorded. They're still talented players. And that's the beauty of basketball is no matter if it's a blacktop somewhere or the NBA, the hard courts of the NBA with 20,000 fans, it's a beautiful game. And the athletes are incredibly talented. But the game has evolved. Whether you like that or don't like that, the game has evolved. And so it's very difficult to compare eras.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's fun discussion to talk about, who's
great.
the GOAT and matching up, because I think that's how basketball fans just are.
Right.
They're just all encompassing thinkers as far as the history of the sport. And you don't have, it's very rare where you could talk about that in a sport where 1 through 5 has to go down and play offense, and then you have to come back and play defense. Mm-hmm. That's why those discussions happen. And I know they get stale. And, if you talk about, if you harp about it for too long, you're kind of like, what's the point? But you don't really have that conversation and that comparison in other sports. You're going to talk about, who, top 5 quarterbacks of all time. At the end of the day, that's something that you could talk about. Baseball, I feel like that conversation is rarely had. Like, if you drop Barry Bonds in this era, would he have, he'd probably smash 70 home runs. I mean, right. I think that's, some of those are layups, but it's like, yeah, you want to see people match up that they never would have had a chance to match up, or they would have had. And you're just like, man, like some of those, early 2000s years where was some of the high stakes series where you could have had a finals with Kobe and LeBron. It was unlikely, but there's always the what ifs as far as talking about NBA history. But
let me say one thing too. You asked a question about the old Cavs team. Mm-hmm. I'll say this, and most people know this. Anybody that lived in that era, that was the greatest. They were the best team, but they lost to the best player.
Sure,
flat out, full period, stop. Mm-hmm. They were the best team.
Yep.
And I think that's what people in Cleveland, until LeBron could deliver the championship for us, I think that's what people in Cleveland will regret the most when we talk about Cavalier basketball, mm-hmm. is not seeing that team win a championship, because they were the best team in basketball. And had Jordan not hit the shot, and I know that's just, that's for us to talk about.
Sure.
But if Jordan doesn't hit the shot, they win a championship that year. They were the best team in basketball. But they ran into the best player, and honestly, they ran into it hurt. And if you go back and really look at it, and I'm not here to make excuses, but they were playing very, very hurt. And Jordan hit an exceptional player, hit an exceptional shot.
Absolutely.
And but back to your question, was that, man, they were amazing. They were so fun to watch. They were so fundamentally sound in every aspect of the game, and they were great. Just an exceptional player hit an exceptional shot. But you know what? They're not the only team that lost to Michael in the 90s. He was kind of good at that. So,
right.
You know what I mean? But yeah, no doubt in my mind, they were just a great team. And I think it's just one of those what ifs that the rest of us will have to live with forever. Is it's like, man, if he doesn't hit that shot, they were great. They were a great team. And I wish you could have seen them live. You can go back and watch YouTube clips now, but
right,
man, that team was, they were special. And the people from Cleveland know that.
Right. And then I'm glad you said that, because I put this up on Twitter a couple days ago, because I think that the franchise kind of gets boiled down to, without LeBron. Some of the more casual fans are like, well, you guys are really nothing without LeBron, which isn't really the case. Like you were just talking about, like talking to my dad, talking to my uncle, they both say the same thing. They say that was, one of the best teams in Cavaliers franchise history. But I think it's interesting, 42 seasons without LeBron, 28 regular seasons below 500, 0 finals appearances is the big thing for me. So I get it. I think you have to be patient within the eras, like this era that you're in right now. I'm not disagreeing with people who are like, just be patient. Mobley's young, Garland's still young. I get it. But then I see people on the flip side that are like, oh, Cavs fans, they're so spoiled, or they've been so spoiled. I'm like sitting there thinking like, yeah, we've had one of the best players to ever, touch a basketball. I get that. I understand that. But this franchise, especially without LeBron James being on the roster, has been yearning and has been patient very, very long to make it to the finals. I just wish that that was the standard. I wish that the team talked about that more often. You could leave LeBron out of it. Just be like, hey, finals or bust, especially this year. That's the standard. That's the standard. I want Atkinson to come into every press conference. This is a finals ready team. We need to get there. The last couple of years, it's kind of been like, okay, cool. We're in the play-in. Then we're in a playoff series. Now we won a playoff series. Like, okay, what's the goal this year? Eastern Conference Finals. I understand that, should be on your mind, but I think that there's just bigger goals. And I think that the fans think about it like that, especially some of the fans from, the 90s generation, where it's like, hey, man, we've seen some good teams before. We know this team has potential. Let's just maximize it. But interesting conversation for sure.
Yeah, and I like what you tweeted there. And here's what I would say, and this may not come across great for Cleveland fans, but I think if you've seen it, there's a LeBron effect.
Mm.
We got the good of the LeBron effect when he came back.
Right.
We've had the bad of the LeBron effect twice now, and so when LeBron comes and goes. And again, I'm old school, so that's just me being me. And as I'm old school and an old school Cavs fan,
mm-hmm.
and I just believe when LeBron, is with you, it's great. And the conversation's always, we need more help. We need more help. We need more help. I'm old enough to remember when they went out and got Wally Szczerbiak, Delonte West. I think it was Joe Smith.
Right.
They revamped their roster at trade time, and it wasn't enough.
Right.
But I'm also old enough to remember when he took Sasha Pavlovic and whoever else was on that team to the finals.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Larry Hughes, Eric Snow.
Right. I think Z was on that team. Alex or what's his name? Verjao, right?
Yeah.
I'm old enough to remember. So I'm willing to give both, but at the end of the day, when he leaves, there's some things in the wake. And so I will give this Cavs team credit is they've rebounded much faster in the wake of LeBron leaving the second time than they did the first, because it was really bad when he left the first time, because he left them with nothing. And that is the thing, is a lot of times the organization, whatever organization that may be, will utilize every asset they have to surround him with talent. So LeBron has enough, so to speak. And I think the Cavs have done that now not once, but twice. And they have nothing left. And when he leaves and there's no assets left, well, you're stuck with nothing. This time around, they've done that faster. So keeping it on a positive note, I'd say they've got that faster. They have assets. Kobe's used them so far pretty well. We need all those assets to now take the next step.
And I will agree with you there. I will give credit to the organization and this front office specifically based on that comparison, because the first time he left, it felt like they were never turning that around. They had Kyrie, they had Tristan, both in that same draft. Like Kyrie was he was an unreal player from his rookie year, up until today. It never felt like they were going to turn that around. They have this second time, and I will say the caveat here is I keep note of that stuff mentally, and I just make sure that I'm kind of keeping expectations aligned with just how I look at things. I believe this is the 8th season that we're going into since having LeBron on the roster. So it's only, how many until it's 10 years and you have it.
You're right.
There's patience, and then it's a balancing act we do as fans. So
no, you're absolutely right. And your math is correct. So
you have to have, optimistic. One of my co-hosts, Logan, he says optimistic but realistic, and I think that's always kind of recentered me when I hear him say that. But Aaron, to wrap up here today, I just want to get a little tidbit of advice here, just some internal thoughts here, because it sounds like you talk to a lot of people. You have your you got a lot going on. You have your own podcast. You talk with Mark a lot, like we've discussed. Just kind of to wrap up here, as far as all the different conversations you've had with people, whether it be about Cleveland sports fandom, whether it just be, in your day-to-day life, or just, anything else, what kind of advice and what has been a lesson that you've learned as far as reaching out, connecting with other people, through your podcast journey and just in general as a human being?
And that is a loaded question.
That's a tough one.
How much time we got? Because
that's a tough one.
And it's not a brag. I've interviewed a lot of people. And
just anything that kind of stands out. If you have something that you're like, oh, this kind of stands out to me.
I'll tell you two. The very first one that I think of is I left corporate America to do this gig.
Okay.
I literally just jumped out of a plane with no parachute. And one of the things that a friend told me one time when I interviewed early on was he said he was at something, and so he was giving credit to whoever this person. So this is like the third person down the line. It's the phone game, but he told me that he was at a thing once, and the guy was talking about you keep climbing the ladder, keep climbing the ladder, keep climbing the ladder, and you're not getting anywhere. And he said, well, what if your ladder's against the wrong wall?
Hmm.
It's not because you're not, it's not because you're not climbing and working hard enough. It's because your ladder's against the wrong wall. It's one of the first, that was when I knew I needed to leave where I was, because it wasn't that I wasn't working hard enough. It was just my ladder was against the wrong wall. Love that. The second thing I would tell you is another guy they interviewed. He's actually the founder of Samaritan's Feet. Played basketball in college. He's an incredible guy. And he said, make sure your dreams and your goals are big enough to create room for others to join you. One of my favorite quotes. It's if I ever have a corporate office one day, that's going to be bolted on the wall. Because honestly, that's what I've tried to do. One, jump out of the plane, put my ladder against the right wall. And two, I know this has nothing to do with basketball, but man, I try to create room for dreams, dream big enough that other people can join me. And they have, and it's been fun. So just those are the first two that come to the top of my head. But man, honestly, it's been just a blessing to interview the people I have. And I honestly get more out of it. I don't know how many people listen. Appreciate everybody that listens, but I get more out of it probably because I get to sit at the feet of people like Mark Price or whoever else I've interviewed and just get wisdom. So it's very tough to pick two, one or two quotes.
Right. Absolutely. Well, powerful stuff either way. I really appreciate you joining us here on the Cleveland Pulse. Like I said, I'll have all your links in the description. Aaron Unscripted podcast and the Mark Price for 3 podcast. Always growing the community and reaching out and talking to other people. Just getting different perspectives. The most face-to-face we could get. There's a lot of, I feel like we're dominated by text or just reading text, reading other people's thoughts in this era. So it's nice to hear the voice. It's nice to see the face. For the Cleveland Pulse faithful, if you've lasted this long, hit the like button. Make sure you subscribe down below. And
all right, wait, I got one more thing before we go.
Go on.
You got to come on mine now.
Okay, well, I'm in. Let's do it.
All right, we'll exchange it offline. You got.
We're gonna end this. We're gonna end the recording right here, and then we'll get a time and a date for sure. But
that sounds awesome, man. I appreciate it. I'm honored to be on, and anything for Cleveland, man. I anything for Cleveland till the day I die.
Absolutely, I totally agree. But Cleveland Pulse faithful, appreciate you guys for hanging on this long. We'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.